Today we're hearing from Canto 3, chapter 26, text number 8. And it says, Karya Karana Karchit Ve, Karanam Pakritim Bandu, Bokchit Ve, Sukudu Kanam, Purusham Pakrite Param. Translation: the cause of the conditioned soul, material body, and senses, and the senses presiding demigods, is the material nature. This is understood of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The Bhagavad Gita, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that when the Lord descends to this material world, he comes as a person by his own energy, Atma Maya. He is not forced by any superior energy. He comes by his own will. And this can be called his pastime or lila. But here it is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. That body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. But when there are bodily reactions as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spirit soul can change his constitutional life of dualities. But
conditional life.
I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, he can change his conditional life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. The living entity is the cause of his own sufferings, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body. But once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. The Mayavadi philosopher's presentation is that the living entity enjoys his pastimes by accepting the body of a hog. The theory is not acceptable, however, because the word pastime implies voluntary acceptance for enjoyment. Therefore, this interpretation is most misleading. When there is enforced acceptance for suffering, it is not a pastime. The Lord's pastimes and the conditioned living entities' acceptance of karmic reaction are not on the same level. Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so now we are hearing about the most, let's say, crucial things of life in the material world. And we have a chance to change our destiny if we can understand this verse and the purport. Animals can't change their destiny, but a human being can. And but it requires knowledge and surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How do we acquire knowledge? Well, actually, real knowledge is acquired by surrendering to Krishna and accepting that we can never be equal or greater than Krishna. We will always be subordinate to Krishna. And therefore, that conviction is enough to destroy our false ego. Now we will be in a position of making spiritual progress. But as long as the false ego is directing our activities and thoughts and desires, there's no hope of liberation from the cycle of birth and death. So when there's ego and there's false ego. So when we have the ego means I am, and false ego means I am this body, and real ego is I am not this body. I'm the eternal servant of Krishna. So this I am concept is very important. But if you think I am this body, then it's completely wrong. But if you understand that I'm the eternal servant of Krishna, now the I am is correct. So the whole idea of who I am, is determined by our correct understanding of our relationship with Krishna. If we do not have the proper understanding of who Krishna is and what our position is in relationship with Krishna, we develop the false I am. But if we have the correct understanding, then we develop the real I am. So, again, the translation of this text number 8 is actually it's wonderful Sanskrit words. Let me just read the Sanskrit. Karya karana karchitve. Karya means the body, karana the senses, karchitve, regarding the demigods, karanam the cause, prakritim material nature, vidu the learned understanding. The learned understands. Bhoktritve regarding the perception, dukkha of happiness, dukkhanam and of distress, purusham the spirit soul, prakriti to the material nature, param transcendental. So the translation is the cause of the conditioned soul's material body and senses, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. That's a very profound statement. So let's very carefully read the purport. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that when the Lord descends this material world, he comes as a person by his own energy, Atma Maya. He is not forced by any superior energy. he comes by his own will, and this can be called his pastime or lila. But here it is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. That body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. But when there are bodily reactions as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spirit soul can change this conditional life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. The living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body, but once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequence. The Mayavadi philosopher's presentation is that the living entity enjoys his pastimes by accepting the body of a hog. This theory is not acceptable, however, because the word pastime implies voluntary acceptance for enjoyment. Therefore, this interpretation is most misleading when there is enforced acceptance for suffering. It is not a pastime. The Lord's pastimes and the conditioned living entities' acceptance of karmic reaction are not on the same level. Haribol. So this is clarifying what is the position of the material of the living entity, whether he's under the control of the material nature or whether he's free of the control of material nature. So everybody has a body, and everyone, and there is in nature the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance that controls the activities of the body. However, it is possible to rise above the control of the of goodness, passion, and ignorance, and come to transcendental goodness. Then one is no longer attached to the material body. And now one begins to, let's say, enjoy the spiritual body. When I say enjoy, experience the spiritual body. Okay. So here it says, this verse says, the cause of the conditioned soul's material body and senses, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. All right, this is pointing to the fact that the living entity has limited independence. In other words, when it says limited independence, what it means? What does it mean? It means we have basically two choices. Either we're going to follow Krishna's instruction, or we're not going to follow Krishna's instruction. That's more or less the limit of our limited independence. Either way, Krishna knows what's going to happen to us. But if we choose to surrender to Krishna, then we can gradually become liberated from the cycle of birth and death. But if we continually choose to engage in sense gratification, we unnecessarily suffer birth, death, old age, and disease. So here it says in the translation of this verse, the cause of the conditioned soul, material body, and sense, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Okay, so as soon as we misidentify ourselves and identify with the body, then we become conditioned. And there are certain demigods that control us. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Yes. So everything is going to depend on how we see ourselves. If we see ourselves as this body, then we become trapped by the material nature. If we see ourselves as the eternal servant of Krishna and act in that way, then we gradually become liberated from the vicious cycle of birth and death. So the beginning of spiritual knowledge is to understand that when the Lord descends to the material nature, he comes as a person by his own energy, which is called Atma Maya. He's not forced by any superior energy. On the other hand, when an ordinary living entity comes into the material world, it's by force. In the case of the Lord, he comes by his own will, and this can be called his pastime or lila. But here is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. That body is not received according to its own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. But when there are bodily reactions, as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spirit soul can change his conditional life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. The living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body, but once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. The Mayavadi philosopher's presentation is that the living entity enjoys his pastime by accepting the body of a hog. This theory is not acceptable, however, because the word pastime implies voluntary acceptance for enjoyment. Therefore, this interpretation is most misleading. When there is enforced acceptance for suffering, it is not a pastime. The Lord's pastimes and the conditioned living entity's acceptance of karmic reaction are not on the same level. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. So this is setting the facts, the real facts of the position of the living entity. The living entity has the opportunity to understand what his real position is, his or her real position is, and then act in Krishna consciousness, by which one can become gradually liberated from the control of Maya. However, when we are only acting for our own sense gratification, we're actually in a state of illusion. And all of the decisions that we make in that state of illusion just keeps us going deeper into the entanglements of material nature. We can free ourselves with the help of a bona fide devotee or devotees by hearing very seriously the Vedic knowledge spoken by a genuine devotee, and then acting according to the instructions of the genuine devotee. But without the help of a genuine devotee, we just float hopelessly in the ocean of birth, death, old age, and disease. Now, the soul is eternal, so we cannot really die, but we can eternally suffer because the soul is eternal. But we could also free ourselves from the cycle of birth and death and have eternal happiness. It all depends on which authority we accept in this life. Most people, they'll go to a library to read different books, to try and understand who they are and what is the purpose of life. And obviously, they get confused. However, by hearing knowledge from a genuine devotee, one can avoid all that confusion and and going down different paths that lead to nowhere. It's like a bridge that leads to nowhere when you follow the speculations of different philosophers and so forth. So we have to decide in our life who we're going to follow. And we're followers. We're not leaders. We're actually all followers. So how do we determine who is the authority that we're going to follow? It's by associating with genuine devotees. Then we have a chance of not going down the wrong path of speculation and engaging in genuine acts of devotional service for the Lord with knowledge of who Krishna actually is and how to please Krishna and how to engage in the devotional service of the Lord. This is all based on who we associate with. Therefore, the most important decision we have to make in our life is to choose to associate with genuine devotees who will give us the truth about who we are and what is our real purpose in life. Otherwise, we can go through many lifetimes trying to figure out who we are and what is our real purpose in life. Not only one lifetime, we can go through many lifetimes with the same, let's say, enigma. Who am I exactly, and what is the real purpose of my life? Okay, so here in this verse again, let's read it more carefully. The cause of the conditioned soul's material body and sense, and the sense presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Okay, so let me read it again slowly. The cause of the conditioned soul, material body, and senses, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Okay, so this means we can't blame Krishna. We can only accept the responsibility of going down the wrong path ourselves. We are we have limited free will, and what is the limited free will? Well, we have two choices only. Either we're going to follow Krishna's instructions, or we're not going to follow Krishna's instructions. That's the limit of our free will. So, if one is educated properly, the person decides to follow Krishna's instructions with the help of a bona fide spiritual man. That means that we have been correctly trained or instructed. If we say, no, I want to learn myself, I don't want to be subordinate to anyone, and speak other crazy ideas like that, then we never find out who we really are, and we are never going to be free from the cycle of birth and death. And that's why it says in this verse, the cause of the conditioned soul's material body and senses, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. Well, most people don't understand this. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. So these feelings of happiness and distress are actually unnecessary. The soul is actually transcendental to the feelings of happiness and distress. It's transcendental by nature. But by following the wrong instructions or theories, we unnecessarily suffer and we become conditioned by the material body and senses. And also the presiding deities, the demigods. And then now we're trapped in the material nature. So when Krishna comes to the material world, he descends to this material world. He comes as a person by his own energy, Atma Maya. He is not forced by any superior energy. He comes by his own will. And this can be called his pastime or lila. So Krishna is not under the control of the material energy. He controls the material energy. So he comes in this material world by his own goodwill. and he also leaves by his own goodwill. But living entities like us, we are forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. That body is not received according to his own choice. Yeah, the body that we have is forced upon us based on our karma and our desires for sense gratification. That body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. There it is. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. So when we hear these things as devotees, then we understand that unless we can stay always engaged in devotional service with the help of a bona fide spiritual master or masters, we can free ourselves from this vicious cycle of birth and death. But if we go merrily in ignorance down the path of sense gratification, because we have an eternal soul, we can eternally suffer in the material world. And there's no guarantee what kind of body we'll have, because there are 8,400,000 species. So to come to the human form of life, we went through all those species. But now, as a human being, if we don't use the body and the senses that we have as a human being to understand our relationship with Krishna and act in that relationship with Krishna, we can go back down again to that cycle of 8,400,000 species before we can come back again to the human form of life, which is the only body that can understand what our real position is and to act in devotional service. The dog can't do it, the cat can't do it, the snake can't do it, the monkey can't do it, but the human being can. So it's very rare to have a human body. And we should understand what is the responsibility we have when we have a human body. That is, that we should understand our relationship with Krishna and act in that relationship. All the different feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who's transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. That's a very profound statement. You cannot blame Krishna for the happiness and misery that we experience. We can only blame ourselves. Why? Because we're not following Krishna consciousness properly. Oftentimes, people will say, I had this one friend, he was, Indian gentleman, and he would always say, it's God's fault. He made beautiful women. And therefore, it's not my fault that I'm attracted to them. It's his fault. He would speak like that. He was crazy. Crazy. And I try to tell him, no, it's not like that, And anyway, beauty is only skin deep. You have to look deeper than the outside, let's say, pellicule of the body. You have to look at the soul of the person, But he was only looking at the outside thin layer of skin, and he was so attracted by it. The skin of women. He was so attracted by it that he was always thinking about women and sex. So To rise above that type of very low consciousness is not easy. It requires serious surrender to Krishna and Krishna's representatives, the genuine devotees. Then we can free ourselves from that skin deep illusion. For example, let's say there's a very beautiful woman, and you put her on a hospital hospital bed, and you make and you make a thick a deep cut right down from her throat to her belly button, and you open up her the body, right? As you do that, any attraction you had for her is lost, because now you see blood, you see uh, uh, heart, you see all kinds of different things, and you suddenly realize that uh, you were in an illusion about the body of this lady. Uh, at one point, as you open up the body, you only see blood, urine, stool, and so forth, right? Uh, so uh, now we see that what we consider to be beauty is actually very thin layer of skin covering the body. And as you go a little bit deeper, you lose the attraction. So, uh, therefore, that's what Sankhya Yoga is. Sankhya Yoga is breaking down, or let's say not breaking down, but analyzing the 24 elements of the body. And of course, the 25th element is the soul, and the 26th element is the super soul. So when you break down the body, just like, you know, if there's an operation, they put the body of the patient, flat the uh, table, and then they can make an incision, let's say starting at the neck, and make a cut going all the way down to let's say the belly button, and then they open up the skin, so now they can operate on the heart or other organs if they have to. Um, so any attraction that one may have is lost as that cut down from the throat to the belly button takes place, and then they open up the breast, and now they see, you know, the heart, and they see the uh, different parts of the body, and any attraction that there was is lost. Uh, and, as you dissect the body more and more, any material attraction that there is for it is lost. Uh, and when you put it all back together again, you might be attracted, but usually uh, people never get to the point of understanding that beauty is only skin deep. It's a skin. There's a uh, very thin level of skin that's covering all the uh, organs of the body, and we're only seeing. We don't even see that part. We because people are always dressed, and they have different types of clothes and different types of perfume and this and that. So we never really see the naked body. And then going even further, we never see the naked body with the cuts in it. and like when there's an operation, and then you really lose any attraction you may have had to the material body. But we can hear this and understand what is the real position of the human body. It is a basically false covering of the soul. Why is it false? Well, because it's always changing. And anything, there's sat and there's asat. So the changing body is asat, meaning it is not permanent. The soul of the living entity is permanent, but the body is not permanent. Therefore, if we only have knowledge of the body, and that is usually what doctors only learn. They only learn about knowledge of the body. Therefore, we'll be in a state of illusion our whole life. Just imagine, the what you would call the dilemma of the body surgeons. All they do is see body all the time. The outside pellicule of the body, and then they make cuts and they see the inside part of the body. So for them, they don't see the soul. They only see the external body. Now, how do we see the soul? Well, we can understand the existence of the soul by the consciousness that we have. So if we have pure consciousness, then when we see the deity of Radha and Krishna, we do not consider it a statue. We consider it as actually the Supreme Personality Godhead and his eternal consort, Radharani. If we have only a material vision, then we see it as maybe two dolls or two statues. And we don't make any spiritual advancement by that, what we would call imperfect, imperfect vision. We have to train our mind and senses to see correctly. And that can only happen in the association of a bona fide spiritual master. So the word darshan in English and in the Sanskrit means how you see. And that's actually the definition of philosophy. The word philosophy means the love of knowledge or something like that. I look up the dictionary meaning of philosophy. What does it say? Real philosophy, the word for philosophy should be darshan.
The study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. The study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline.
That doesn't give you much information about what the, real darshan is. Darshan in Sanskrit is the word, it is actually the word for philosophy. How you see, right? So do you see yourself as this body, or do you see yourself as the soul? Most people just see themselves as the body, so their darshan is faulty. Right? Darshan is the actual word for philosophy in Sanskrit. How you see things. So there's many different ways of seeing things, but the correct way is to see everything in relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Personality Godhead. That's the only way we can understand who we are. It's in relationship to Krishna. We cannot understand who we are in a vacuum. But but most people try and identify who they are with another mundane person, just like many people are trying to figure out who they are by focusing on someone like Elon Musk, right? He's a very rich guy. And so they try and emulate a person like that. And they end up in a let's say complete state of illusion. Even Musk is in a state of illusion. So what we need to do, however, is to understand ourselves in relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We're never going to be equal to the Lord, but we can follow the instructions of the Lord and make genuine spiritual progress. What is progress? Is seeing things as they are. So the body is temporary. The soul is eternal. That's seeing things as they are. The body can be used in the service of Krishna, by which one can be liberated by the cycle of birth, from the cycle of birth and death. So that's the correct use of the body. Or the body can be used just for sense gratification, which keeps us in a state of illusion and repeated birth, death, old age, and disease. So all this requires education by which genuine devotees help us see things correctly. So seeing things correctly, that's the meaning of darshan. To not see things incorrectly, to see things correctly. And to see things correctly, we need the help of genuine sadhus. So we always have to go outside of ourselves to understand who we are. We can't just sit alone and try and figure out who we are. This is what Descartes tried to do. If you ever read about Descartes, he was a French philosopher. He tried to figure out who he is. And he eliminated everything that he thought was not who he was. And then he ended up with, I think, therefore I exist. And then he reestablished who he is on the basis of that, I think, therefore I exist. Look that up. Look that up. René Descartes. He was a French philosopher. And he tried to eliminate everything that he thought that he was not. And he ended up with, oh, I think, therefore I exist. Right? And then from that, he rebuilt from the one thing he knew that was real, that is, I think, therefore I exist. Therefore, he reconstructed reality, his perceived reality after he eliminated everything that he wasn't. It sounds a little confusing. What does it say? René Descartes.
Cogito ergo sum.
What?
That is a statement that
I think, therefore I exist.
I think, therefore I am. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was after his deep meditations to try to figure out who he is. So he ended up with that. I think therefore I exist. And then from that, he reconstructed who he is and what his position in the material world is and so forth.
So he was searching for an indubitable truth, something that cannot be doubted. He reasoned that
What was that word?
indubitable,
In
Indubitable. It's almost like indoubtable, indubitable,
Dubitable.
indubitable,
Dubitable.
TUBI, indubitable.
All right, go ahead.
He reasoned that even if he doubted everything, the very act of doubting required a thinker. Thus, the act of thinking proved his own existence as a thinking being. This insight became a foundational element of modern Western philosophy. Key points: self-awareness as proof of existence. Descartes argued that the ability to think, whether doubting, reasoning, or imagining, demonstrated his own existence. Philosophical implications. This statement shifted the focus of philosophy to the individual and subjective experience.
And what?
Subjective experience. Because of him, now it's like people started saying, like, whatever you think is what you are. It introduced the method of radical doubt as a tool for discovering truth. While groundbreaking, Descartes' assertion has been critiqued and expanded upon by later philosophers such as David Hume and existentialists like Sartre. Descartes, I think, therefore I am, signifies that thought is undeniable evidence of one's own existence. It is a foundational affirmation of self-awareness and consciousness.
Yeah. Well, I think, therefore I am, right?
Mhm.
Well, what if you think the wrong thing?
No, but his point is, whether
Yeah.
you question, whether you doubt, whether you imagine, but whatever your act you are doing, that act proves that you are a thinking being. Even if you think bad, I mean, I'm not sure that it's any significant new discovery, but he just simplified it down to, I think I am. So whatever you think is your choice. That's how the later people
Okay,
implement.
so uh, he is trying to understand himself through himself,
Mhm.
but you have to go outside of yourself to understand who you are.
Correct.
You see? You have to have the help of a bona fide spiritual master to understand who you are. You cannot really understand who you are just by yourself.
Yeah, but
Because
his point ignores the fact that the three modes of material nature are always operating on us, which means that you will be forced to think based on the modes that you are operating on.
yeah, that's why you have to go outside of yourself to understand who you are. You have to go to a bona fide spiritual master. If you just try and understand without going outside of yourself, I mean, going to other, uh, authorities, you might never understand who you are. Like, for example, let's say we never came in contact with Prabhupada. Would we understand who we are? No. Yeah, we would never understand. So, therefore, what did Descartes try and do? He tried to eliminate everything he was not sure of. And after doing that, there was only one thing he was sure of. I think, therefore I exist.
I am.
Oh, okay, I am. That still is not necessarily the absolute truth, because you can think wrongly, right? Uh, so he tried to eliminate everything that he was not sure of. And the only thing he ended up with is that I think, therefore I exist. Right? But you can think wrongly. So you're still, in a state of illusion. And Descartes was in a state of illusion. Why don't you look up how he died? It's very interesting. He made a big mistake and he died. Because he developed this philosophy that had no mistakes in it, right? At least he thought that way. But yet he made a mistake and he died. Huh?
He contracted pneumonia.
Yeah.
He died on 11th February at Chan.
Yeah. How did he contract the pneumonia? He decided to go visit this lady that was like his supporter during winter when it was really cold. And it was a mistake to do that, and he died. Whereas his whole point was that through his rationalization of things, he could achieve the perfection of knowledge or life. But he died by making a mistake, by trying to go somewhere in the wintertime.
He was invited by the Queen of Sweden,
yeah,
Christina,
yeah,
to tutor her in philosophy.
Right.
And the Queen's rigorous schedule required Descartes to give lessons early in the cold mornings, which was reportedly difficult for him as he was accustomed to a warmer climate and more relaxed lifestyle.
Right.
He was used to sleeping late since childhood to accommodate his sickly nature. One morning, likely as a result of this early rising combined with freezing Swedish winters, Descartes caught a chill that proved to be fatal.
Yeah, he made a mistake, but his whole philosophy was to avoid making any mistakes. To have perfect philosophy by which there's no mistakes. Okay, so far, so much for Descartes. He was, very famous and very, erudite or very, very educated man. But he made a fundamental mistake, although his whole philosophy was to avoid making mistakes. Okay? And why don't you look up a little bit more about his philosophy? He tried to build up a philosophy that was perfect and free of uh, falsity or free of illusion.
So, methodical doubt. Descartes famously adopted the method of radical doubt to strip away all beliefs that could be questioned. Through this process, he arrived at the indubitable truth. I think, therefore I am. The statement asserts that the very act of doubting proves the existence of self as a thinking entity. This foundational principle laid the groundwork for modern rationalism. So he is the source of rational, thinkers, dualism, body and mind. Descartes proposed substance dualism, the idea that mind and body are distinct substances. Mind or soul, we combine mind, soul, intelligence, everything into one bucket, is a thinking, non-extended substance. The body is an extended, non-thinking substance. He believed the two interacted through the pineal gland, though the mechanism of this interaction remains a topic of debate. Rationalism. Descartes emphasizes the use of reason as the primary source of knowledge.
Of what? What's the primary source of knowledge?
Reasoning.
Reasoning.
Yeah. Contrasting with empiricists who emphasize sensory experience. Basically, is going beyond the direct sense perception, say, and then keep reasoning, questioning. He argued that certain truths, like mathematics, are innate and accessible through pure thought. Foundationalism. Descartes aimed to establish a solid foundation for knowledge akin to mathematics by identifying self-evident truths and building upon them systematically. His meditations on first philosophy, that's the book, outlines this process, starting with doubt and progressing to proofs of God's existence and the reliability of external world.
That's what?
He basically used this doubt and progressing towards the proofs of God's existence and reliability of the external world. Proof of God's existence. Descartes proved several arguments for the existence of God. He actually used this to prove the existence of God. One, he said, an ontological argument. The concept of a perfect being implies existence, and existence is a necessary attribute of perfection. Causal argument. The idea of an infinite God could not originate from a finite mind, therefore God must exist. So his point is that we define God as infinite, and our mind is finite.
Infinite, not
Yeah,
infinite.
infinite. And the idea of infinite God could not originate from a finite mind. Therefore, God must exist. So that is his rationale, saying that we are a limited being. So the concept of God could not be created in our mind. So there must be God.
Well, his concept of God is not complete.
Yeah.
Why? Because he's trying to figure everything out by himself.
In fact, his approach, which is specifically an emphasis on doubt, reason, and individual inquiry, challenged the traditional authority and laid the foundation
And
for
traditional authority means you
That's right.
accept the
Guru.
authorities,
Mhm.
the gurus' authority. And he's trying to go outside of that and use only his reasoning.
I think there's some question online.
Okay.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Hare Krishna Maharaj Ji, Dhanvat Pranam. All glories to Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Maharaj Ji, this verse says Shri Krishna, like we are part of Shri Krishna. So he is driving us. We also have the material thing, or what do you call? So is there another energy which drives the material instinct in us?
Okay, well, in the purport it says the living entity is the cause of his own sufferings, of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body. But once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. So everything depends now on what we want. We have free choice, right? But it's limited to two things. We have free choice, but it's limited free choice. Either we accept Krishna's advice or we reject Krishna's advice and just speculate our own advice. You see. So therefore it says here, but here it is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. That body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. But when there are bodily reactions as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spiritual soul can change this conditional life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. The living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body. But once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. The Mayavadi philosopher's presentation is that the living entity enjoys his past by accepting the body of a hog. This theory is not acceptable, however, because the word pastime implies voluntarily acceptance for enjoyment. Therefore, this interpretation is most misleading. When there is enforced acceptance for suffering, it is not a pastime. The Lord's pastimes and the conditioned living entity's acceptance of karmic reaction are not on the same level. That's a very profound statement. So, someone like Descartes, who was, he's a brilliant thinker, but he got a lot of things wrong. Yeah. And that's why he thought that he had a perfect philosophy, but he made a mistake and died. He tried to go visit this lady who was his supporter, financial supporter in the wintertime. And, you know, they didn't have cars at that time. They had these horse and buggies, things like that. And basically, he caught a cold and he died. So, although he tried to develop a perfect philosophy, he died because he made a mistake. For what good was his perfect philosophy? The perfect philosophy is to surrender to Krishna. That's the perfect philosophy. He tried to make his own perfect philosophy, and that would be free of all doubt and all false things. But it didn't really help him because he made a mistake and he died. So this is let's say, what happens to speculators. They speculate some things that may be correct, and then they think, well, whatever I speculate will be correct from this point on. And then they make mistakes like Descartes, and they die. So it's very important to have a bona fide spiritual master, and in a bona fide disciplic succession. That way, you have a good chance of not making any mistakes. But without the help of bona fide spiritual masters, you can make many mistakes and never really come to understanding what is the truth. Okay, so in the purport, there's a lot of interesting things. Okay, it says that here it is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. That body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. But when there are bodily reactions as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spirit soul can change his conditional life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. All right, so there's, as long as one has a human body, there's always a chance or always the opportunity to understand things correctly and become free of the cycle of birth and death. On the other hand, one can also make mistakes and not become free from the cycle of birth and death. So, therefore, if we use our body and senses only in the service of Krishna, we're on the fast track of becoming free from the cycle of birth and death. If we meditate based on our own speculations, then we'll never understand what our relationship with Krishna is, and we'll always be trapped by the laws of material nature. So this is what the problem of, these philosophers. They speculate a type of thought, and they think that, it is perfect, like Descartes, right? And he thought that he had made a perfect philosophy in which there would be no mistake. but yet he made a mistake and died. So that's why it says the living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body, but once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. I don't think that Rene Descartes and many other people understand this. In other words, we always have limited free will. And it's limited to two choices. Either we accept Krishna's instruction or we don't accept Krishna's instructions. That's the limited, that's the limit of our free will. We can't will that the sun doesn't rise tomorrow. Can't do that. It won't work. But we can will that tomorrow I'll begin to chant Hare Krishna, right? And follow the regulative principles of spiritual life. That's why here it says, the living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body, but once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. That is our takeaway today, right? And it's a very profound statement that Prabhupada is making. Everything depends on what we are desiring. If we desire the wrong way, well, we suffer unnecessarily. If we desire the right way, that is, following the instructions of bona fide gurus and following Sanatana Dharma with no speculation, strictly following it, that's the right decision. And we avoid so much suffering, so many births and deaths unnecessarily. So, without having education of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, people will never understand these things. So we're very fortunate to be hearing from Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's interesting that the title of this chapter is called Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. So you have to learn what is material nature, and you have to learn what is spiritual nature. If you only learn what is spiritual nature and never understand anything about the material nature, you can make mistakes. But if you understand what is material nature and what is spiritual nature, then you're prone to not make so many mistakes or to avoid making all mistakes if you correctly understand these things. Okay, any questions? I think we're way over time. And we'll stop there. All right, so what is our takeaway? The living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or immaterial body, but once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. In other words, you can't blame Krishna. You can only blame yourself, or we can only blame ourselves because we have limited free will. But it's limited to two things. Either we accept Krishna consciousness or we don't accept Krishna consciousness. Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Any other questions, comments?
Even in the material body, we can be serving Krishna, right, Maharaj? We are serving Krishna.
You, even in the material body, we can serve Krishna, right? So
here it's saying when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body. So now that we have taken material body, our choice was to satisfy our senses.
yeah, but you can transform the material body into a spiritual body.
Yeah, that's my question.
Yes.
Through devotion service.
Yes. Exactly right. And that's explained. That fine word is explained like that, where you can transform the material body into a spiritual body by engaging in devotional service. But where it says that, I have to find it. That's here. I can find it now. If not, I have to look.
We did not choice and we got a material body, but now that we met devotees and devotees, Prabhupada is telling us that you can transform this into a spiritual body by performing devotions.
Yes, exactly right. Spiritual. I don't know. Maybe you can find it.
Yes, ma'am.
You found something?
That's it.
What is that? How you can transform a material body into spiritual?
Dovetailing in the devotional service. So you're looking for the specific reference?
Verse, yeah. Bhagavad Gita also. Brahmarpanam Brahma Brahma Brahmanamato. Verse.
Yeah, maybe.
We will follow up in later session, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll end the session for today. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.